our special guest, Don. You and I had a chance to talk a little bit before we went on, and wanted to have him on when we had the indication from the publicist that he was available. It's written a really interesting book. You don't see a lot or really get a lot of information about some of the great baseball legends of the past. I'm talking about really of the early 1900s. Of course, Ty Cobb was one of the all-time great ball players. A lot of stories about him. Of course, it was before television and radio, so you didn't get to see or hear a lot of them. But reading in baseball history, as you and I have done over the years, Don, really fascinating to now have a chance to talk to the grandson of Ty Cobb. His name is Herschel Cobb. He's written a book called A Heart of a Tiger, Growing Up with My Grandfather Ty Cobb. And Herschel joins us by telephone tonight. Herschel, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I am doing really well. Thank you, fellas, for having me on your program. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where are you situated at the moment?
I am in Menlo Park, California, which is a good golf shot from Stanford University.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm in the middle of what's called Silicon Valley.
Of course, your grandfather was known as the Georgia Peach, wasn't it? Wasn't that one of his nicknames, Herschel, when he was a ball player?
He was known as the Georgia Peach, and coincidentally, he had a home nearby where I live in Atherton, California, that he purchased after his retirement. Decided that the cold of Detroit in the winters and the heat of Atlanta in the summers, he came out west. He was offered a chance to look at the Seals as a team to buy, scouted the area, liked the weather, and purchased a home.
Herschel, I think one of the things that we should say right at the outset, there were a lot of difficulties in your family. The players, of course, who played against Ty Cobb always thought he was one step short of being the roughest guy to ever play the game. But you also had your own problems to settle, and before you wrote the book, you had a lot of background on your own family and on yourself.
Well, that is true. I started writing the book because my daughter requested stories of me as a child, and I didn't have anything really pleasant to relate to her. My parents were stuck in an unhappy marriage. They were dysfunctional. They had their own individual demons. I managed to live through it, but not without some terrorizing and bullying and whatnot in my very young years. But anyway, when my daughter asked me for some stories about my childhood, I immediately started relating some funny stuff about summers that I spent with my grandfather, Ty Cobb, either in Atherton or going up to Lake Tahoe, where he had a cabin at Cave Rock on the Nevada side, about 8 miles north of South Shore. And they're always funny, and I relate several of them in the book because I thought that they told something about him as a person. They meant something to me because they were meaningful in my maturation and my basically getting sort of a grandfather-father that I never had as a youngster, and basically just enjoying myself and liking to be with him and spending time with him. He was very fun to spend time with. He had a lot of confidence. He always had something to do, some place to go, some adventure to partake in, and he showered his grandchildren with affection and caring, and that was a real pleasure to experience.
Doug?
Yeah, I had a chance to read through the book, Herschel, and a lot of great stories like you mentioned, but as Don kind of alluded to there, difficult situation, obviously, with your dad, having to deal with that, and your grandfather almost having to kind of be a surrogate father for you at times. Would that be an accurate way the relationship was?
Yeah, in many respects that is accurate. I don't really try and characterize it that way, but my dad died when I was 8 years old. He was 33. He was over 6 feet tall, a little over 300 pounds, and he died of a heart attack. I felt quite relieved at the time because he was just an unhappy person. He was a bully and did a lot of terrible things. And then shortly after he died, my Uncle Ty, who was the first son, about a year and a half later, died of a brain tumor, in which he went from being a practicing physician to his just being in a wheelchair in a matter of 4 months. It was a summer at my grandmother's house, And I kind of watched this process, and that was horrible. I saw my grandfather trying to comfort his son, but the very qualities that propelled him to be such a great baseball player, his intensity, his fierceness, and his independence also served to estrange him from his family and his sons in particular. And it was very, very sad to watch him try to encourage Ty Jr. to talk. Ty Jr. had one of those brain tumors that's in the back of the head, where he needed full-time assistance in a wheelchair. At the end of the summer, he could not even remember the names of his own children. It devastated my grandfather. He was just broken, very, very sad, retreated to his home in Atherton, pulled all the blinds, sat and moped around, not knowing what to do. All of his fierceness, his competitiveness, his championships, his money could not do anything to save his son. And I think he knew that he'd never meet either of these two sons as grown men and have a family. Well, it was
Herschel,
go ahead.
You just touched on one thing that we've followed through the years so carefully. What made him such what made him such a great investor? He was a terrific ball player, no question about that, one of the all-time greats. But he also was a great investor.
Yeah, he was a very intelligent guy, and those stories are really very, very interesting. He grew up near Royston, Georgia. The town that he grew up in no longer is there, but he plowed fields behind a mule so his father could plant cotton. So he learned quite a lot about the cotton business. Well, now, when he started playing baseball, he didn't have any money. He was in Detroit. He was battling to even keep a job. But Detroit, in the early part of this century, was very much like, say, Silicon Valley is today. Tons and tons of inventions. Cars were being improved. He met Leo Chevrolet. He met the Dodge brothers. He met the fellows who ultimately ended up owning General Motors. There were about 140 car manufacturers. He met people who started General Electric. While he was a resident of Detroit, there was a big transition of gas lights going into homes. He actually experienced that. My grandmother told me tales of that. And all of this invention was going on, and he used to hang around the major hotels where these guys met for drinks after work and stuff, and they liked hanging out with a ball player, and it was, Ty, you should be investing in this, and you should be investing in that. He didn't have any money, and they would get him to buy a few shares of their company. The story about him investing in Coca-Cola is particularly amusing. The Woodruff family bought the formula for Coca-Cola. They wanted to hang out with ball players. They particularly liked Ty Cobb. They all got along quite well with him. He liked to hunt. They liked to hunt. They were outdoorsmen. And anyway, they loaned him $400 to buy his first shares in the Coca-Cola company. Well, it did well, and he kept buying and kept buying and kept buying over the years and ended up owning a substantial share. And he realized that he wanted to be independent of baseball for his living, and while he was a ball player and he got his investments going, he openly encouraged his teammates and players of other teams to invest in stocks so that they'd have something when they left baseball. And he had a good eye for this stuff. He invested in major companies or companies that turned out to be major players in their fields in the United States economy. So, interesting stories.
And he did well, obviously, as a ball player for what they got paid back then. But unlike a lot of ball players, Herschel, even at that time, he knew to look ahead and plan for the future. And of course, the money he made with the Coca-Cola stock, not only was he well off, I would assume he took care of a lot of the family, and I know he did a lot of work for putting together a college fund, didn't he, in Georgia?
Yes, he took very good care of his family, and when he died, he had already started the Ty Cobb Educational Fund based in Atlanta, Georgia, and he contributed a quarter of his estate to that fund. That fund has been going on for 50 years. I think it was 2 years ago was their 50th anniversary. They continue to give money to students who want to go to college. I don't think it's limited to the state of Georgia anymore, but initially it was Georgia kids who work hard and want to go to college, and Granddaddy wanted to support that. His father was an educator. He never had an education. He was self-educated. He was smart as a whip. and he was insistent that his grandchildren try and get an education, and he believed in it so much that that's where he wanted a lot of his money to go. He was generous in a lot of ways in that regard.
You mentioned at the beginning of our interview that your sister really put the idea in your mind to start to write this book. How many brothers and sisters do you have, and what does she think about it now that you've completed the task?
Okay, I have an older sister and a younger brother. It was actually my wife who suggested I write down these stories. My sister's passed away 3 years ago, but Lynn, my wife, suggested I start writing down the stories I was telling our children, and pretty soon, the stories of the North Shore Club at Lake Tahoe and my visiting his office and seeing all of his memorabilia and watching him autograph baseballs and action photos, and meeting him late at night and hearing stories of baseball and his career. These really interested my kids, and when I wrote them down, I said, he was a funny guy, and he was a real good grandfather. So after a while, I realized that there was something here that I wanted to pass on, mainly because my kids liked it. I saw the real power of grandparents in taking care of grandchildren whose parents maybe didn't do as well as they could have. In my case, they just did poorly, but a lot of kids benefit from their grandparents, and I thought that sharing my story would get others to share their stories and grandparents to realize how much of an influence they have. I think one of the things that I've reaped from having written this book is that whenever I mention it, other people tell me their family stories going back at least 1 or 2 generations. And I tell you, Doug, the stories are just incredible. People have such strength and fortitude, and they pass it on to their offspring and their grandchildren. It's great. It's a great thing.
You got a great story in the book, Herschel, about when you went in and I guess for the first time you saw Ty Cobb's, some of his memorabilia, some of the trophies, all the baseballs that he would sign, and was that the first time that it kind of hit you how much of a legend? I know you probably knew your grandfather was a ball player, but how much of a legend he was when you saw all that stuff?
Oh, absolutely. I knew my grandfather played baseball, but he never liked my mother. He kind of saw her for what she was, and she liked him. She disliked him intensely. And where I grew up was a small town, so not many people talked baseball much. But anyway, it was an afternoon that I visited him after I had finished my first year in what was Babe Ruth League in those days, a full-size diamond and all. And the expectations of me as a baseball player just ballooned. I mean, people were yelling at me to do things that just sounded very, very strange. I mean, to bite people and get a hit every time. And so when I saw my grandfather that summer, I went in, and boy, I had a head of steam going. I wanted to know what in the hell he had done. And he had never, he wasn't a braggart at all. He didn't say, I did this and I did that. He'd never mentioned baseball or his career. He was really much of a, grandfather, see what you kids can do out in the backyard, have ice cream. Well, anyway, he shooed away my sister and my younger brother and took me by the shoulder and said, come on, you can help me for a while. We went into his office, and he sat me down in this swivel chair next to him, and he started reading this letter, and I started looking around, and man, there are autographed pictures of Babe Ruth and Tris Speaker and used baseball bats in the corners and gloves. But right in front of me was a poster of him, and it had these various parts of his career with a big picture of him in an oval center, and it was batting and sliding and fielding. And I thought, oh, my God, everything that I suspected is real. And for a moment, it really scared me because I thought, oh, my God, now he's going to expect me to do this in baseball, or maybe he's not going to be the same grandfather that I really want. Because, I liked having a grandfather. It's great that he's Ty Cobb and he's a great baseball player, but I liked him as a grandfather. He was fun to be with. He always had a few dollars in his pocket, and he liked ice cream. But we spent an hour there reading letters from kids who wanted an autographed baseball or an action picture. They had something to say, and they wanted some special help. And you could tell he kind of empathized with these kids, but he had always liked kids. I saw him many, many times with kids, and he was always generous in offering ice cream in particular. So, yeah, we did, and after an hour in there, and he didn't say anything. He just said, well, I guess that's enough. Let's go out and see how the ice cream is doing with your brother and sister. and he left me there for 5 or 10 minutes to just gawk over everything that was there that was part of his baseball career. And we went into the other room, and there was ice cream, and that was a central thought. So, yeah.
Well, Herschel, you mentioned you're in the Silicon Valley where he actually went out in the later years and decided that was the place to live. And I know you didn't invent Microsoft, but what is your claim to fame out there in Silicon Valley?
You know, I have a lovely family. Lynn and I met later. I think when my daughter was born, Madeline was born, I was about 48. When my son Ty was born, I was 50. So I had a lot of years to kind of work through some of the scars and demons that my parents had left me with. And I've been blessed with 2 healthy children and a wonderful wife who's encouraging all the time and laughs at me in just the right ways. And my daughter laughs at me in just the right ways. You know, Ty, my son, is down in college playing Division III basketball. He has tens and tens and tens of buddies. He's just like my wife. He's very gregarious and open, handles interviews really well. You would enjoy meeting him, and I hope someday that we can spend, have lunch together or something like that. I don't think I have any particular claim to fame. We have a pretty typical life for our area. Everybody goes to school. Premium placed on getting into a good college and working hard and making your own money and having a lot of friends and treating people decently.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, there's been so many legendary stories about all those ball players of those years, Babe Ruth and like you mentioned, Ty Cobb and all those guys. A movie they made a few years ago with Tommy Lee Jones, kind of when he was in the age group, I guess, when he was your a grandfather at that time. How much of that is accurate? And how much is kind of legendary or mythical?
Well, that movie is based upon Al Stump's book, and I think Al Stump had a notion that he was going to attain a certain level of fame, and I think he took some liberties. I didn't see the movie, but I read the book, and when I read the first chapter, I just laughed because the first chapter is about traveling up to Lake Tahoe to the cabin in the winter of 1960 to work on Ty Cobb's autobiography. I was just saying, Al Stump never was at that cabin. He describes the cabin. He has it as a huge hunting lodge. He has the fireplace described as brick. It's not brick. It's granite. You would remember it because it's granite, big wooden polished slab across the top. It's a very simple cabin with one grand room and a bunch of small bedrooms. And in the wintertime, it doesn't even open up because you've got your water from Lake Tahoe, and you need to prime a pump to get any water into the house. Well, if it's snowing, you're down there in freezing water trying to prime this pump and shouting back and forth, is it working, is it working? I can't see my grandfather having done that, nor Al Stump. Also, the more important thing is that Granddaddy died in 1961, mid-year, so he would have been within 6 to 8 months of dying during that trip, and he was in no shape to travel. He was hobbling with a cane. He refused to drive his own car. Stump has both of them driving separate cars. But I will tell you this. I read the book, Cobb by Al Stump, and other than Ty Cobb was not a womanizer. That just wasn't his thing. He liked to go hunting with his buddies. He liked his bird dogs. He kept a kennel of bird dogs in the South. If you take that out, it's a pretty good read. And we take the first chapter out and realize that they wanted to create, a Gothic character. But most of the book is a good read, and a lot of it is not inaccurate at all. So, he was a very, very fiery, exciting person. And in the early years of baseball, I would say that baseball really, really benefited by having somebody who was a lightning rod for drawing people into the stadiums. They wanted to see Ty Cobb do exactly what Ty Cobb was best at. And I don't know if you've ever heard Casey Stingle's final commentary of Ty Cobb, but I've read it many times, and it goes something like, his greatness was vastly more than statistics. It was something that only those who saw him in person could really understand, and even they usually had a hard time putting their feelings into words. Stingle says it was like he was superhuman. That's how he and I think Cobb's dazzling hitting his base path running. I've read quotes where Babe Ruth says, yeah, I was a great hitter, but, if I hit the ball, that was great. But think about Cobb. If you didn't, if the pitcher wanted to get rid of Babe Ruth, they just walked him. But you can't walk Ty Cobb because once he's on the base paths, he's going to steal second, then he's going to steal third, then he's going to steal home, and he rattles everybody and he changes the entire game. They were competitors, but they had a lot of complimentary things to say about each other. They played golf together. Cobb tried to help Ruth in his later years and had a lot of sympathy for his illnesses in his later years. Granddaddy said, Babe he just didn't look good and just wasn't himself. But while they were competing, it was tough for Ty Cobb because people loved the home run, and Ty Cobb was not a home run hitter, but they had a lot of respect for each other, enormous respect.
Mm. And your grandfather had a sort of a tough life at the end himself with illness.
Well, he had many, many things wrong, cancer and a heart problem, diabetes, and no amount of ferocity can overcome those types of things.
Yeah. Well, it's a great book, Herschel. It's a little different type of baseball book, but I think it really kind of gives a true portrait of your grandfather. Like you said, there was no TV or radio back then. I guess you had to read the newspapers to follow, what he did on the diamond. But he was a tough player. I think he even described his legs, how beat up they were just from all the spikes he took. Right? I mean, pretty tough to look at, right?
Well, I think it was tough on both sides.
Yeah.
It was a different game then, it was more rough and tumble, and it was a real battle. But, yeah, you're right.
Heart of a Tiger is the name of the book. Herschel, give out a website. People can get a hold of the book if they like, or get a hold of you.
Well, yes. I can be reached at Herschel Cobb at yahoo.com. And that's my name, HERSCHELCOBB at yahoo.com. Anybody wants to contact me, we can arrange to get them a signed copy of the book, and I'm happy to do that. I don't have a website for the book, but it's available in bookstores and on Amazon, and there are a lot of parts of it that are an interesting read.
Great.
Well, Herschel, it was great having you on with us, and just a fun 20 minutes. I really appreciate what you've done, and I'm going to get the book from Doug as soon as he's finished with it, but I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed the last 20 minutes.
Well, it's been mutual then, gentlemen, and I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on your program. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Herschel. Look forward to talking again.
All right. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.